All right. Here we are. Welcome. Uh, while we wait for guests to enter the webinar, I am going to regale you with some terrible oyster jokes. So first is, how do oysters talk to each other? If you are already in the webinar and you want to chat a guest, please feel free to go for it. How do oysters talk to each other? They use shell phones. That's SHELL, in case you missed it. All right, second terrible oyster joke. What do you call oysters' rush hour traffic gridlock? What do you call oysters' rush hour traffic gridlock? Any guesses? Any guesses in the chat? No? All right. It's a Pearl Jam. Ha ha ha. Okay, it's looking like we have a steady amount of people in the webinar, so I am going to go ahead and kick things off. Let me just minimize all these windows. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second season of the Winter Oyster webinar series. This series is presented by Oyster Recovery Partnership and sponsored by Mom's Organic Market. I'm your host, Allison Albert Gercio. I'm the marketing manager with ORP. And in case you can't read it on your screen, tonight we'll be covering sustainable seafood. So we'll be talking about what that is, why it matters, and how Mom's Organic Market and ORP are working for it. Before we dive in, I want to cover some webinar housekeeping quickly. We are offering live captioning for this event, and you can turn that on in the control panel at the bottom of your screen. This broadcast is being recorded, and we will post it on our YouTube page after the event. Your participant lines are muted and your cameras are turned off. So we kindly ask that you submit your questions through the Q&A feature, also in the control panel at the bottom of your webinar screen. Please, if you have questions, don't submit them through the chat because we might miss them, and we want to be sure that everybody's questions get answered. So next slide, please. We want to acknowledge our Winter Oyster webinar series sponsor, Mom's Organic Market. Mom's has been a great long-term partner of ORP's. They participate in our mission, doing everything from shell recycling to offering local aquaculture raised oysters in their stores, bringing their staff on educational tours of our hatchery, and sponsoring our big annual fundraiser, World is Your Oyster Festival. So we at ORP are so grateful that Mom's understands the importance of oysters, and we especially appreciate their support of this webinar series. So next slide, please. A little bit about ORP. We're the nonprofit expert in Chesapeake Bay oyster restoration, and we are working hard to restore the bay's native oyster population by building sanctuary reefs, rebuilding public fishery reefs, supporting oyster aquaculture, recycling oyster shell, and offering hands-on and volunteering events throughout the year. Since our founding in 1994, and with the support of some major restoration partners like the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science Horn Point Laboratory, we have planted more than 10 billion oysters, 10 billion, that's billion with a B, and recycled more than 280,000 bushels of oyster shell. Those are really big, impressive numbers. We're extremely proud of the work that we do, and we completely understand that there's a lot more work to be done and we are here for it. So next slide, please. You can support us by making a donation to support our mission and shopping ours and our partners' merchandise, designating ORP as your Amazon Smile charity, and of course, buying local seafood from places like Mom's, eating oysters at home or at Shell Recycling Alliance member restaurants, and of course, recycling those oyster shells. So we are going to kick off tonight with a poll to kind of see what you guys already know about sustainable seafood. So you should see a window pop up on your screen shortly. Great, there it is. Okay, so this multiple choice question is prompting you to consider how much seafood is mislabeled in the US, meaning labeled as something that it is not. And your answer choices are 5, 10, 30, and 70%. So go ahead and make your guess. While you're doing so, I want to be sure that you know that we've got an awesome prize giveaway at the end of tonight's webinar for one lucky winner, and that includes a $50 Mom's gift card and your choice of an ORP hat or a t-shirt. So I will announce that randomly selected winner at the end of the presentation, so please stick around. And hopefully now we've got those poll results. What do you think? Let's see what you guys thought. Okay, so the correct answer was 30%. Way to go, guys. You're pretty smart. Hopefully we'll still be able to teach you some things about sustainable seafood. All right, so now it's time to meet our speakers. The woman behind the magic, behind the scenes magic that you will not meet tonight is Kaylee Fleury. She is our events and marketing coordinator, and she is making sure all of our tech runs smoothly on the back end. So thank you so much, Kaylee. Next, we have Jen Walters. Jen's going to come on screen. Jen is a coastal resource scientist with ORP. And let's see. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Allison, how are you?
I am good, thanks. Thanks for being here tonight. You've got
thank you for having me.
Long history with ORP, right?
I do. I've been with the organization for 4 to 5 years now, doing various things with the organization. So I'm excited to talk about a little bit about what we do with sustainable seafood tonight. So thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. And next is our main attraction. We are so pleased to have Chris Miller also as a presenter tonight. He's the produce director and the meat and seafood coordinator with Mom's Organic Market. Hey, Chris, are you there? There you are.
I am. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Nice to see you all. Yeah, so I'm guy at Mom's. I've been at Mom's about 13 years. I handle produce, meat, and seafood with Mom's. We're a 22 store chain, independently owned. Our purpose is to protect and restore the environment. And so, you know, seafood really is a huge component of that, with our base of operations being here within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Yeah, really happy to be here. And I will say that 30% number is going to be different if you come and shop at Mom's. It's going to be closer to 0% mislabeled. And traceability and transparency is a huge focus of ours. And I think whether it's produce, seafood, or meat, it's the only way that we can really move forward is knowing the full supply chain and what we're purchasing from the retail level, wholesale level, down to the consumer level. So I'm gonna go with 0. I might have been the only one who voted 0 for that reason. But anyway, thank you, Allison. I don't know if I'm supposed to pass it back. It is on me now. The buck is on me. I apologize. All right, I'm up. I got that message. All right. So I'm more of a conversation guy than a presentation guy. I apologize about that. We're going to hit a couple topics here. We're going to talk a little bit about sustainable seafood. We're going to talk about why it matters, what Moms does, and how you all as consumers and supporters can get behind it. And then beyond my expertise, Jen's going to talk a lot about what ORP does and the specifics around how we can support the Chesapeake Bay watershed and sustainability there. So here we go. All right. So again, what is sustainable seafood? Sustainable seafood is at the highest level, basically, whether it's wild caught or aquaculture, which is farmed seafood. What we want to make sure we're doing is supporting fisheries or fish farming that allow us to have more seafood and more food in the future than we have right now. We want to make sure that we're, sustaining what we have, but beyond that, as a theory, I think the word sustainable kind of implies that we need to sustain where we're at. A lot of what we do and what we look at sustainability as a higher level concept is how do we move forward and how do we build a more sustainable and wholesome supply chain. And so when we are looking at our choices and what we choose to bring into the stores, we're trying to take everything into account from how healthy is the stock of any given fishery, how much wild caught fish goes into a farmed fish feed, and how do these things all play together so that we can move forward and make sure that we're, at least staying where we are, but at best moving forward and never moving backwards. So that would be where I would say sustainability and seafood matter. You can go to the next slide. So a little bit debunking myths around sustainable seafood. So some of what we were having conversations around this topic before this presentation, from where I stand, I'm a retail person. I buy and sell seafood, and I work with producers, I work with purveyors, wholesalers, and so I have a lot of conversations with people all throughout the supply chain. So I think I'll tap back to my comment about transparency. To me, relationships, especially in the seafood industry, are a huge factor in sustainability. So at Moms, we'll hit it on a couple different slides, but we make sure that we're vetting each of our levels of the supply chain all the way through. I think I might be jumping ahead of myself, but just to debunk, I'll say here, one comment I want to make is frozen versus fresh. So a lot of times we look at frozen seafood as less than. I look at frozen versus fresh seafood a lot of in the same way that I look at local versus organic produce. And so the way I think about that is, would I rather have a conventional local farm in my backyard that is pumping pesticides and harmful chemicals into the Chesapeake Bay watershed, or would I prefer an organic farm that may be a little bit further away? And I think the same thing can be said about seafood, right? Local doesn't necessarily mean it is better or more sustainable. So my personal preference, just as a consumer and somebody who's been working in the seafood industry for a while, I will happily buy a piece of frozen seafood and thaw it out on my own. In the industry, just so you all know, on the back end, a lot of times fresh seafood that's on the seafood counter, it is called refreshed in the industry. And all that means is it's thawed. So the way I like to think about it is, would I rather thaw it myself, or would I rather, a retailer or a seafood market thaw it and then me have it a day or two later? So I like to think about the source and the way the seafood is harvested rather than how it is delivered to me. There are other sustainability factors in there. A lot of fresh seafood is delivered via airline freight with a 1 to 2 day turnaround, and that has a much higher carbon footprint than something that may have been harvested at peak freshness and frozen then, and then thawed after more truck freight that is a little bit less carbon impactful than air freight. So I think maybe that's my words on debunk for the sake of time. So market goals and initiatives to help. So Moms has always been behind sustainable seafood. I kind of plugged the frozen seafood for a reason. Our seafood department is about 95% frozen. The majority of what we sell is frozen. Majority is frozen once. There's a lot of seafood out there that is frozen twice, sometimes 3 times over the course of the supply chain, and then sold quote unquote fresh, right? So what we focus on is once frozen seafood, regardless of the source, and that allows us to have a much more open scope of sourcing when it comes to our sustainability metrics. So we can source sustainable sockeye from Alaska, or farmed Pacific bass, and we can get that frozen and not have to worry about the transport, and not have to worry about necessarily the geographic location, but actually worry about the practices that went into raising or catching that fish. We do have a mix of wild caught and farmed seafood. When it comes to sustainability, we do look at both of those factors. I do not believe that aquaculture and farmed seafood is a bad thing. There have been a lot of changes in that side of the industry over the course of the last 5 to 10 years that make it much more approachable. So we can move along. All right. So at Moms, we do focus on some really great programs with our local partners, such as True Chesapeake Oyster Farm. They are a Chesapeake Bay watershed-based operation with oyster aquaculture. A huge focus on sustainability and the benefits of filtering the water within that watershed. And we offer a program where customers can purchase directly from True Chesapeake and pick those oysters up at our stores, and then hopefully return those oyster shells back to our stores so that they can go back into the ORP cycle of recovery. And then just real quick, the way we vet our seafood program, we partner with the Monteray Bay Aquarium's Seafood Watch program, which is an amazing way to vet whether a particular item is sustainable or not. We focus on best choice and good alternative. We will never sell an avoid program, avoid item. So we're green and yellow only, and we use them as our fishery experts when we are making our product mix decisions. And yeah, I would like to pass it along to Jen. I appreciate you guys giving me a couple of moments here to speak about what we do at Moms. And Jen is the expert on sustainability in our local watershed. So thank you, Jen.
Great. Thanks, Chris, so much. As was mentioned before, or in my introduction, my name is Jen Walters. I'm a coastal resource scientist and project manager at ORP. So thank you, Chris, for talking about kind of what sustainable seafood is and what Moms does to promote sustainable seafood at the markets. I'm going to now talk about some projects that we run or manage at ORP to promote sustainable seafood within the Chesapeake Bay region, specifically talking about projects that help enhance commercial fisheries harvest within the bay, promoting oyster aquaculture, and assisting or promoting projects to replenish wild harvest oyster bars. So with that, I'll go into one of our main projects here at ORP. All right, so we have been working with the state or Department of Natural Resources for over 10 years to develop an electronic harvest reporting tool or platform for commercial fisheries harvest within the state. And kind of what that means is, commercial fisheries harvest, or things that you would be familiar with, such as the blue crab or rockfish or striped bass, are harvested, and then that harvest is reported to the DNR on a monthly basis on paper reports, so that those fisheries managers can manage those populations, ensuring that there's still populations there to support that fishery and support consumers that want to purchase them. So that process is really old and it's slow, and you can imagine that information gets in kind of behind times and doesn't allow fisheries managers to really react and be proactive and manage those fisheries effectively. So now we have developed an electronic harvest reporting system, which operates on a daily or trip level basis, where the watermen are going out each trip and reporting their harvest in real time. And those fisheries managers are then getting that data in real time and able to react and make sure that those fisheries are not over harvested. Which is great. So we started with the blue crab industry back in 2012. The system has been expanded to now include all commercial finfish, such as rockfish, the charter industry or for-hire boats that take you out and fish, and also most recently the shellfish fishery. So oysters and clams, which are in our alley there. So in addition to commercial fisheries harvest, of course, I'm with the ORP. So of course, we're going to talk about how we promote sustainable oyster harvest, whether that is with oyster aquaculture or the public fishery or wild fishery. So as Chris kind of mentioned, there's been a lot of, bad assumptions or things with farm raised seafood. It's really improved over the years, but especially with oysters, because with oyster aquaculture, you're putting additional organisms into the water. So that's taking that competition away from wild oysters that would be harvested off of natural oyster bars. But then also the oysters that are going into the water are providing habitat for other species and improving water quality in their water filtering ability. So they can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day. So it's great. And at ORP, we have several projects that we do to try to make that industry simpler and more efficient so that we can promote more growth in that industry, more people getting into it. One of those being the farm management tool. So we've been working with the industry to develop an application for your phone that would help those those farmers with the behind the scenes business operations in terms of inventory management for them, making their business more efficient. And then also helping to facilitate that harvest reporting process. So it would, again, like the FACT system, provide that data to fisheries managers in a more timely and effective way so that they get a better understanding of all the harvest that's happening in Maryland and are able to manage those fisheries effectively. So we can kind of go into the next slide. So along with the farm management tool, another program that we do, I talked about wanting to promote growth within the oyster aquaculture industry. So a lot of hesitation with people getting into the oyster aquaculture industry. Maryland is growing in that aspect, but we're kind of behind compared to New England and Virginia and some other areas of the country. But a lot of people are hesitant because of not knowing kind of where to start and maybe some upfront, like huge upfront costs to get the business started. So we partner since 2011. We've been partnering with the University of Maryland Sea Grant Extension Agency to provide training opportunities to kind of take that fear away from people that want to get into it, provide them with any kind of training opportunity they might need to get started, and then also lessen that cost for any supplies such as shell, larvae, tank rentals, and things like that, so that they can avoid those costs and really get the business running so that they can get a good start to that business. So we've been doing this since 2011. We've had up to 46 participants in any given year since that, doing it on an annual basis. And on a yearly, they could do around 100 million oysters planted, or 100 million spout on shell planted on private leased areas. So it's had a lot of success and a lot of interest for sure. So I'm talking about oyster aquaculture, but of course, along with promoting oyster aquaculture, we want to make sure that that wild harvest off of those natural oyster bars is still sustainable. So we talked about, the electronic harvest reporting, but there's also been a program that has occurred over decades with the state to make sure that those bars that are being harvested on an annual basis, so everybody, you think about harvest taking away from that source, but you want to make sure that it's being replenished so that that fishery can be sustained and that population of oysters is there for years to come, so we can make sure that it is sustained, what we're talking about. So we have been working on this program since 2015 at ORP, and we're hiring watermen on an annual basis to plant shell as hard bottom substrate for those oysters or baby oysters to then latch onto and make sure that the oysters that are on that bar aren't sinking into a softer, muddy bottom. And then also planting spat on shell, as you can see in that bottom left corner picture. And along with that, there's also replenishment of seed or baby or juvenile oysters that have been planted as well. So through that program, like I said, we hire 10 to 15 watermen annually to help us with these efforts, replenishing those wild harvest bars. Since 2015 at ORP, we have facilitated over 90,000 bushels of seed being put back onto bars and 1.5 billion bushels of, hold on one second, 1.5 billion bushels of, or 1.5 million bushels of spat on shell, and, or 1.5 billion, sorry, spat on shell into those bars, and 1.5 million bushels of just dry aged shell as that hard substrate. So it's been a great effort to really make sure that those bars are replenished on an annual basis. And I think, yep, with that, I just want to thank Allison and Kaylee for putting on this webinar and giving me the opportunity to talk about what ORP does here to promote sustainable fisheries. And I'm going to pass it back to Allison to provide a fun update about the poll winner. Make sure to stick around for questions at the end, though.
Okay. Sorry about that. A little bit of a transition there. So yes, I have an exciting announcement, but first I want to take a second to just say thank you to Jen and Chris. That was awesome. It is not easy to do a Zoom webinar where you can't see or hear the reaction of anyone who is listening or watching. So I just want to give them a round of applause. If you want to give them a round of applause in the chat, I welcome that as well. Let's show them some appreciation. So next up is Q&A, but before we dive into that, I want to announce our giveaway winner. Congratulations to Reed Nichols of Queenstown, Maryland. Reed, you are the winner of a $50 Mom's gift card and an ORP hat or t-shirt of your choosing. Congratulations. Do us a favor and send Haley a private chat to share your contact info so we make sure we have your best, the best way to reach you. So woohoo, congrats again. Thank you. And now we've got some time with Chris and Jen for Q&A. So it looks like we have a couple of questions lined up that one I am very familiar with, which is Mr. James Henry Thies, who is a shucker extraordinaire who has been trying to get us to recycle oyster shells up from York County, Pennsylvania. James, I assure you that we have not forgotten about you. And if and when we ever have the capacity to send a crew up to York, Pennsylvania, we will be recycling your shell because persistence pays and the squeaky oil gets the wheel. So thank you for inquiring about that. All right, so I'm gonna shoot this question to Jen. Jen, we have an anonymous question that is, when is an oyster considered a spat? And can you say maybe a little bit more about what you know about an oyster's life cycle?
Sure. So an oyster, of course, starts with the spawning process. When they spawn, there's going to be larvae, which are free swimming that go out into the water column. And then they have like a foot. So a shellfish has a foot. They then attach to a hard substrate. Really any hard substrate, but shell is going to be preferable. So they are going to then attach to the shell. And from there, they are going to grow, harden, and grow their own shell. And that's when they would be in spat form. So when they first attach, they're going to be a tiny little speck that's barely visible with the human eye. Really, you have to look under a microscope. For projects we do at the hatchery, they're looking under the microscope constantly to see these baby oysters or spat on the shell. And then they're going to grow into what you know as a adult oyster.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Hopefully that answers. I mean, we consider a spat anything from a speck up until like, an inch kind of ish.
It's an art, not a science. Just kidding. It's definitely. Okay, so our next question is also for you, Jen. Chris, I promise I'm going to get one for you.
You don't have to. You're fine.
And Jen, the question is, can oysters attached to rock used to protect channels or shorelines? So I think they're asking about, oops, our presentation just went away. Thank you. Thank you for bringing it back. Go ahead, Jen. Can you say a little bit?
Yeah, so I think the question was rock, but specifically attached to shorelines too?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, so like I said, oysters aren't picky really in terms of substrate. They will attach to anything that's hard. So often in a lot of our restoration work that we do at ORP, we are using alternate substrates such as granite or different types of rock for that hard substrate for oysters to set onto. So yeah, something along the shoreline they could definitely set onto. In Maryland or within the Chesapeake Bay region, our reefs are subtidal, which just means they're underwater, but in a lot of other areas, they're kind of intertidal and more so along the coastline. So definitely, the possibility for that. They really will set onto anything that's hard, as long as there are adult spawning oysters there to produce that larvae and have natural recruitment throughout the water column.
Excellent. Okay, so all right, we have another question related to oyster shell recycling, and it's about what happens to the shell after they after ORP receives them. Can you kind of describe the process that they go through to be, cleaned and reused?
Definitely. So Tommy and his crew here at ORP go around to restaurants and they are recycling a lot of shell that would be consumed at those restaurants, or we're getting shell from other areas. That shell is then washed at a facility that we have in Cambridge to make sure it is clean and allowing that clean surface for oysters to then settle on again. That shell is aged to make sure that there's no disease going back into the or bacteria going into the water. And then once it is clean and aged, they're put into, depending on the program, either bags or tanks or cages that are then going into tanks. And we partner with the University of Maryland Horn Point hatchery or different hatcheries throughout the region they are going to then produce the larvae that we talked about from the spawning oysters or spawning broodstock, adult oysters. And once they have that larvae, they will then release that basically into a tank of caged oyster shell so that it'll set on those shells. Once that process is done, once they're at a certain age and they're, well protected to go out into the water, we then load that onto a planting vessel or boat. And that spat on shell, as we call it, is placed back into the water, usually with like a fire hose. So that's basically the cycle of when we're getting your shell, how it's going back in and creating more baby oysters out there in the bay.
Awesome. Okay, Chris, I've got one for you. And the question is about shell recycling at mom's stores. So I know that, or just talk about, I think it's only in Maryland. So can you share where your Maryland store locations are and a little bit more about shell recycling at mom's?
Sure. I am not the expert on the full shell recycling program, I will admit. More information can follow if needed, but yeah, our website, momsorganicmarket.com, best resource to find all of our specific locations in the Maryland, the DMV region. That's where we're going to be doing our shell recycling. We also, so we're picking up in Virginia, Maryland, and DC stores. So depending on where you are, just check out the mom site and you can find your closest store. Outside of the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, we're not currently able to do that pickup.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. I actually got asked a question, which is awesome. So the question is about we lost our presentation again. Oh, it's coming back though. Okay, so the question is about the Mermaid's Kiss fundraiser and if that is still being offered by ORP. And actually last year we launched a new annual fundraising event called World is Your Oyster Festival. It is happening again this year on Thursday, September 28th at the B&O Railroad Museum. We are so excited. If you attended Mermaid's Kiss in the past and you had a great time and you ate and drank to your heart's content, you will absolutely love your World is Your Oyster Festival. It is a similar event, just expanded a little bit more to showcase ORP's operations, shell recycling, oyster restoration, things like that. So we haven't launched ticket sales or anything yet this year, but stay tuned, follow us on social media. This is a great prompt, actually. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can follow us there, and you'll definitely see news about World is Your Oyster Fest 2023. So it is about 7:10, and I don't want to keep people too long because we all want to get back to our Wednesday evenings. I just want to say thank you again to our presenters and to Mom's Organic Market for sponsoring tonight, and of course to all of you for attending. Thank you so much. I hope you'll join us in 3 weeks on Wednesday, February 8th for our next webinar in this series all about oyster shell recycling. And that will be with our shell recycling manager, Tommy Price, who definitely can answer all of your nitty-gritty questions about shell recycling. So thank you again. Have a great evening, and we will look forward to seeing you on February 8th. Good night.